here at the African School of Decentralization, we are coming to you live from Montfleur Conference Center in Stellenbosch, South Africa. I'm hoping and assuming that I'm audible, not only here, but also online. I see indications that that is the case, so that is fantastic. Technology is working with us, so welcome from Montfleur, Stellenbosch, South Africa, to all of you, wherever you are joining us from. My name is Jaap de Visser. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Africa Working Group of the Local Public Sector Alliance, and it's my privilege to moderate this session. This session is quite special because it takes place in the middle of the African School on Decentralization, which is a school co-hosted by the Dalla Institute of the University of the Western Cape and the Center for Federal and Governance Studies at Addis Ababa University, jointly hosting the African School on Decentralization. This year's edition is taking place in South Africa, and we rotate between Ethiopia and South Africa. This year, we are here in Cape Town and Stellenbosch. And the African School on Decentralization has partnered with the Local Public Sector Alliance, who has generously also assisted us financially with hosting the ASD. And in that vein, we have now a joint session where we bring together the activities of LPSA with activities of ASD. I see a hand from Laura. Do we have a sound problem or?
Do we not see the sheet screen or
Sorry, I can't hear you.
Kathleen needs to share the screen.
Oh,
but someone disappeared. That was on, but then disappeared.
But shall I continue?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So that's the background to why we are combining the activities of the African School on Decentralization with LPSA this afternoon. So the ASD is a school that brings together 25 mostly young practitioners, advocates, activists in local government, carefully recruited for this program, which is a certificate program that successful completion of the program results in a joint certificate by the University of the Western Cape and Addis Ababa University. So they are here for 2 weeks and are being they receive lectures, conduct exercises, get assessed, and go through a 2-week program on this year's theme, which is decentralization and human rights. And what we want to do this afternoon is link up with the broader LPSA network to discuss the linkages and also cross-pollinate between the African School of Decentralization and LPSA and the emerging initiative of a Pan-African network of decentralization. So just quick bit of ground rules for this afternoon. We're combining a physical meeting here in Stellenbosch with an online meeting and a number of participants from all over the continent and the globe. So we thought it's best if the participants that are joining us online, if you want to engage with what's happening here, please use the chat box. We've got Jackie Matura keeping an eye on the chat box, and she will feed the information through to us here. And we will use the microphone here on this side to enable participation by those that are here with us at the ASD. So hopefully that will work to get us started. So let me then, without further ado, introduce Dr. Jamie Boax, who is the Executive Director of the Local Public Sector Alliance. To get us started with an overview of Local Public Sector Alliance and tell us more about what is the LPSA and what does it want to achieve. So Jamie, if you are with us and if you are ready, then the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, or for those who are in my time zone, good morning, but I think most of you are, for you, it's afternoon. Can everyone see me and hear me?
Perfectly, yeah.
Fantastic, and I hope everyone had a nice lunch, perhaps. I wish I were with you in person. It would be a lot more fun. At the same time, sharing of international experiences, sharing in a global community of practice sometimes requires that we meet in person, and sometimes it requires that we meet virtually. As Jaap and some of the colleagues in the room may be able to tell you, we had an opportunity to meet in May in Nairobi with over 25 experts and professionals practicing in the field of decentralization and localization, all from the African continent, with a few lucky ones like myself joining from outside Africa. So then we had an opportunity to be together. Unfortunately, today I'm only with you virtually. You have in your room in the form of Jaap, one of the co-chairs of our Africa working group, and two of the other co-chairs, Judy and Ka, will be speaking after me. So I'm going to leave to them some of the specific comments on the Africa working group. What I would like to do is share with you a little bit about the local public sector alliance in general. And I would like to share with you perhaps a little bit of our ambition to transform the LPSA working group for sub-Saharan Africa into what we internally refer to as PANDA, or a Pan-African Network on Decentralization Advocates. As Jaap just said in his opening remarks, we're extremely excited about the Africa School on Decentralization and the work it does by bringing you together, by sharing experiences in person, by discussing the opportunities that effective and inclusive multi-level governance has for development, for human rights, for a range of human endeavors. And that is fantastic. Where we believe we may be able to complement the African School on Decentralization as LPSA and perhaps as PANDA is that once you go home, this shouldn't be a one-off event. There should be a network that keeps you connected throughout the years as you progress in your respective careers, whether it's as a policymaker, whether it's as a researcher or a civil society leader, that you're able to maintain in touch, learn from each other, communicate and advocate together, not just in your country, but across the continent. Now that's but before we jump in, let me share a little bit about LPSA and how we see we might be able to play a role. This technology is going to hopefully allow me to do so by switching to my slides. Everyone can see my slides now, I hope.
Yes, we can see them.
Perfect, perfect. Very good. So I'm hoping to take, as I said, no more than 10, 15 minutes to give an overview and then pass it on to the colleagues that will take you through the content. Because we do believe in decentralization in the local public sector alliance. So the executive director, the central government should talk less, and the local governments and provincial governments should talk more. Very quickly, to begin with, what is the local public sector about? What is our mission? We were established in 2021 informally, and in 2022, we were incorporated as an alliance that seeks to promote inclusive, equitable societies and sustainable global development by enhancing the understanding of decentralization and localization as complex, cross-cutting, and multi-sector stakeholder reforms. As you no doubt have experienced in the past week, decentralization or localization are never straightforward linear processes. And it's important to understand the complexities of decentralization. And within that mission, we see ourselves as an alliance of advocates for inclusive and efficient decentralization and localization, as a global professional network, so we can learn from each other. The topic is so expansive that it requires understanding of political decentralization, administrative decentralization, fiscal decentralization. Obviously, it involves lawyers, economists, public administration experts, and we need to all learn from each other. Unfortunately, we live in a stovepipe world where we don't get many opportunities to exchange and learn from each other. But if we can inform, connect, and expand the global community of practice, and shift the focus of the community of practice away from the global level to the country level, where decentralization reforms are really made, that is what our alliance aims to do. Our theory of change is quite simple, and that is that in the past, stakeholders have worked on issues related to decentralization and localization in a fragmented manner. We generally don't talk to each other outside of our organizations. Development partners don't really talk much to local government officials. Local government associations may not reach out as frequently to researchers as is needed. Researchers, we tend to be serving in our universities. So there's an important need for us to be all connected in a coherent global community of practice on decentralization and localization. And the Local Public Sector Alliance, or LPSA, facilitates that through three programs: knowledge development, knowledge sharing, and convening outreach and field building. And we believe that by having empowered, well-informed country-level decentralization and localization policy debates, we can achieve more resilient, inclusive, and sustainable, equitable, and efficient communities, societies, and development. So that's our theory of practice. And that requires bringing together lots of different stakeholders around the topic of decentralization, localization, or multi-level governance. Not only central government and local government and intergovernmental coordinating bodies, but also sector colleagues, also scholars and researchers, also civil society actors, as well as development partners and international organizations. In our past 3 years, we have gone from being a small group of decentralization and localization advocates to a global network of over 2,000 decentralization and localization professionals and advocates who are now members of the Local Public Sector Alliance. How do you organize such a large global network? Well, we've decentralized ourselves, even though we're a young organization. Rather than managing things centrally from Washington, where I sit today, most of the activities of the Local Public Sector Alliance are done by regional and thematic working groups. Colleagues like yourselves situated around the world who are either regional experts or thematic experts who bring and share their expertise, again, knowledge development, knowledge sharing, and convening, outreach and field building, who regularly get together online or in person or in hybrid conversations such as today to share knowledge and experience. And rather than going into the working groups, Kawala, one of our Africa co-chairs, will soon contribute to a bit of the work on that working group. LPSA centrally has a number of analytical frameworks that can help in exploring different aspects of decentralization. For instance, our Logica framework focuses very much on the nature of local governance institutions, which may vary from country to country and global region to global region. Our Infer framework looks at intergovernmental fiscal and expenditure relationships in different countries, and so forth and so forth. So we, as a global community of practice, have developed a number of tools that we can share throughout. Now, with that background about who the Local Public Sector Alliance is, for the past, I would say, at least 6 months, longer now, the colleagues from the Sub-Saharan Africa Working Group have suggested that what we should do is transform the regional working group for Africa into a regionally led Pan-African network of decentralization advocates. And that this process could support elevating the decentralization and localization debate in Africa by improving inclusive governance, public sector efficiency, and trust by promoting consistent, responsible use of inclusive data and evidence to inform better decentralization, localization, and local policy decisions in Africa. And so I'd like to spend a few minutes kind of sharing with you the thinking that LPSA has about the process and the pros and cons of transforming our regional working group over the next couple of years into a Pan-African network. First of all, the why. I think I've already explained to you our shared viewpoint that we believe that better, more inclusive and effective multi-level governance are essential to development. And that could be human rights as much as it could be sustainable global development, achieving the SDGs and so forth. But these reforms should be context appropriate and championed by local and country level experts and champions. But ultimately, we believe that evidence-informed decentralization and localization would improve people's well-being and trust in policymaking processes. Now, there is a gap, we believe, because in practice, decentralization and localization are often pursued strictly based on assumptions and convictions with actually very little evidence and analysis presented. And of course, that is what the Africa School on Decentralization, different universities that are part of ASD, as well as others, we're trying to fill that knowledge gap. But that knowledge gap should be filled with consistent, responsible use of inclusive data and evidence so that better decentralization and localization policies can be made. And the subtext here is that unless decentralization reforms are evidence-based, evidence-informed, it is highly unlikely that they'll succeed. Either they won't succeed simply because they're poorly informed, or they won't succeed because different stakeholders are not working together to achieve a common objective, speaking a common language. So there's an important need to bring champions of decentralization together, not just for 2 weeks in Stellenbosch, but to have a more sustained interaction between champions of decentralization across Africa. There are often some assumptions that we make about local governance unless we take a deeper dive that may actually cause us to fail to pursue decentralization and localization effectively. So we often assume that local governments are more inclusive and responsive than central governments, right? Now, it's true that that may be the case, right? Theory tells us that may be the case, but just because you have local elections, for instance, doesn't mean that local governments are necessarily empowered, inclusive, and responsive. So that is kind of a governance question. We really should understand the nature of local governance institutions in Africa before we can say, oh, decentralization or devolution is better. Likewise, we often think, local governments have the ability to raise their own revenues and spend on inclusive services and development. Again, that's kind of an assumption we make with little or no evidence that we probably should explore with evidence. And if we look around the world, unfortunately, there's very little evidence to support that assumption. In many countries in Africa. Some countries in Africa spend a lot at the local level, others spend less, yet for others, we simply don't know what the situation is. Another assumption about decentralization and localization that I've heard made, for instance, by UN colleagues, is that policymakers know where development progress is being made and they allocate resources to the places where needs are greatest. Again, that's kind of an assumption that needs to be supported by evidence. We need to ask ourselves, do policymakers know where, in which local jurisdictions, development progress is being made, and whether or not they direct greater resources to the places where needs are greatest? To the degree that this question has been studied, it is often the case that national policymakers direct resources based on political motivations rather than on the places, rather than to places where needs are greatest. So there's, again, a lot of need for evidence generation to analyze where development progress is being made and where it's not. Even just the question, which countries in Africa measure the SDGs or other development indicators at the subnational level, the list becomes very, very short. And a final area of inquiry where evidence can be very critical in making sure decentralization and localization happens is the assumption that local governments, once they're granted power and authority, that they deliver effective, inclusive public services. And again, this is worthy of investigation and asking ourselves, do local government leaders actually deliver effective and inclusive services? And what evidence is there to support that? Okay, so these lines of inquiry, I think, would really help if we were to pursue decentralization effectively across Africa. I have a feeling I'm getting a text from Jackie that my time is basically up. I have 2 slides left or 3 slides left. As I mentioned earlier, what a Pan-African network of decentralization advocates could do as an extension of the current regional working group would be to bring together, perhaps at a larger scale than is possible today, central and local policymakers, evidence organizations, and other stakeholders from across Africa to elevate the debate and to catalyze action by engaging in a consistent, responsible use of data and inform decentralization and localization policies across Africa. Without going into the details, for each of those 4 areas of inquiry or questions that I just highlighted, they align very closely with some of the analytical frameworks that LPSA has developed over the years. They also align with global efforts and initiatives where evidence is very scant with regard to African countries. For instance, OECD and UCLG have a global database on subnational finance, but data for, I'd say, roughly half the African countries is simply, or more than half of African countries is not available. So this would be an area where a Pan-African network could work closely, not only with LPSA, but with other global actors to make sure that the understanding of how countries in Africa work, it connects to global conversations on the issue. Likewise, in the area of SDG localization, there is a lot that a Pan-African network could do in terms of informing the extent to which countries in Africa are effectively localizing policies by engaging at different levels of government. With that in mind, what is the big picture we're left with? Connecting the why, evidence-informed decentralization and localization efforts, improving people's lives, through the goal of what Panda could be doing to promote consistent, responsible, inclusive use of data and evidence. The how is bringing together policymakers and evidence organizations, bringing together stakeholders across the spectrum, with ultimately underlying that to reduce power imbalances throughout. Where we see a number of areas where LPSA and its regional working group on Africa, which could be empowered as a Pan-African network, could add tremendous value. Obviously, empowering Panda to localize the decentralization debate in Africa, meaning this is not a conversation about Africa led from somewhere else, but it is a conversation about Africa led from within the region. LPSA and its global network could provide specialized methodology, skills, and experiences. Establishing this network would strengthen the evidence-informed policy ecosystem in Africa. Panda activities, which could mirror the programmatic areas of LPSA, would unlock capacity and resources, bringing together policymakers and evidence organizations, strengthening evidence organizations, and strengthening capacity and incentives of policymakers to pursue effective and inclusive decentralization and localization. With that, let me stop there, other than to say that LPSA, one of the things we're working on, hopefully within the next month we'll roll out, is a LPSA member portal. Membership of LPSA is free. So if you go to decentralization.net and register as a member, not only will we keep you up to date on future meetings of the Africa Working Group and other working groups, but in the near future, we'll roll out a more expansive membership portal that will allow you to connect directly with all your colleagues that are also LPSA members, and share your experiences, not just through webinars, not just through meetings like these, but by seeking out colleagues that are doing exactly what you're doing in other countries and connecting bilaterally to learn from their experiences. So let me end there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jamie, for that great overview of LPSA and sparking the debate on the emerging Pan-African network of decentralization activists or advocates. Thank you so much. I think I want to sort of, immediately what you told us, I want to transfer it almost to the participants here by saying, I want you to think about how you can benefit, how your organization, in your work, how you can benefit from being a part of this network, of the LPSA kind of network. Here's a network that's real. It exists. It's not just a website or something elusive. It's something that really brings practitioners, academics, activists together around a common theme of let's look at in an evidence-based way decentralization. And I want you to start thinking about how you can get involved, how your organization, your work could benefit from being a part of this initiative, also as a way to keep the momentum of the ASE going, because I think that's really something that we want to pursue. So start thinking about that as you listen to the next input, for which I'm going to invite Ms. Karwala to tell us a little bit more about the Africa Working Group, which is one of the regional, let's say, entities of LPSA. LPSA is true to its commitment to decentralization also internally, because the regional chapters of LPSA organize themselves through these working groups. And Ms. Karwala is one of the co-chairs. She also leads an international consulting company called Strategies. And I'm going to hand over to you, Carl. If you are with us and ready to go, then the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jaap, and good afternoon from Cameroon. I wish I could be with you in beautiful Stellenbosch. It's very nice to be participating in one way or another, once again in the African School on Decentralization. So Dr. Burks just gave you an overview of the LPSA, and it was mentioned that we have both, within the LPSA, we have both thematic working groups and regional working groups. And right now you are within the Sub-Saharan Africa working group. And basically our expert working group brings together all of the key stakeholders that we have already mentioned. That is policymakers, researchers, practitioners, scholars, civil society organizations, and ordinary citizens, who are perhaps the most important in a decentralization process, at all of the levels of governance, from central level to maybe a meso level that exists in many of our countries, and all the way to local government. So the idea is to bring all of the I would say, well, representative of the continent, in that we have three working group co-chairs, myself, I am based in Cameroon and have the advantage of representing both Francophone and Anglophone Africa. So the Cameroonian specificity in that we are bilingual. Yap de Visser, whom you've heard from the start of this event, is one of our co-chairs based out of South Africa. And Judy Oduma, who will be speaking later on, is the third co-chair based out of East Africa in Kenya. And basically, what we do as a working group is that we have main events that sort of tie the working group together, our quarterly working group meetings. We reach out to our membership and identify themes, specific areas of concern, specific projects that members may be working on, and we identify speakers from within the membership and have a quarterly meeting on a specific topic where we have various members or people that we have invited in as speakers to develop that topic and to enable us to increase our knowledge sharing, but also a lot of experience in terms of what people have already implemented on the ground and what we can learn from it. So basically, our working group seeks to share knowledge for us to increase, as Jamie pointed out. Unfortunately, in Africa, we do not have the levels of documentation and research that other parts of the world do. So within our working group, we seek to improve the knowledge and also share what is being done on the continent in this area of decentralization. Our working group membership is open. You can go on the website as you've done for this event. You will find the Sub-Saharan Africa Working Group link on the website, and you can join the working group, and that will enable you to receive the reminders of our quarterly meetings and of any other events that we are holding. Membership is completely free. And as you have heard, we are working on growing into a Pan-African network. And this is the time to join and to help us co-create that network as an advocate for local governance in Africa. So thank you very much. I hope whether you're in person or online, you will join what is a very open, very participatory working group in helping us advance decentralization on our continent. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the meeting along with us. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Kai, and wonderful that you were able to join us from Cameroon and be part of the ASD. Already the ASD draws on the LPSA network already. Last year, Kai was represented at the ASD. She organized one of her colleagues to be a lecturer in the ASD. So the ASD and the LPSA already have a track record of collaboration that precedes this year. And of course, we continue that this year and want to strengthen it going into the future. So thanks so much, Ka, and all the best to you in Cameroon. So as one of the prime examples of the activities of the Africa Working Group, we want to highlight the work that we did in May this year. The working group hosted a successful convening of the Africa Working Group as well as other stakeholders in Nairobi, and we've got Ms. Paddy Siadza-Knudsen to tell us a bit more about what transpired at that particular meeting. It was a very fruitful, rich two-day meeting discussing various themes related to decentralization and localization. And Paddy has gracefully agreed to give us a bit of a feedback on that meeting. Paddy is one of the full members of the Africa Working Group, very active in supporting the work that the working group does. She is a highly experienced international development practitioner with a very long resume that I do not have the time to share with you, but rest assured that she is a powerhouse. So over to you, Paddy, and please tell us more about the main meeting that LPSA hosted.
Hello, good afternoon in Cape Town. I hope you have had a good deliberation, but also thank you to those who are joining us online. We do really appreciate the time that you have taken to join us. I'm hoping to use my technological tools on my mobile phone as I'm being told, but only, I think you would need to enable me that only the host can share. If I could be allowed to share, so I could share my screen for a very brief and short presentation.
Patty, I can show the slides from my end if you prefer.
Oh, even better. Thank you so much, Jamie. Appreciate it. And so I think one of the important things for us to, put into consideration first is to say that, this workshop was indeed something that happened, that had not happened before. So bringing a whole range of experts from public sector that are really concerned about how does the local public sector thrive and work. And so it was really important to put that. So it was first of its kind. And the idea was really for us to talk about how do we elevate the debate on decentralization and multi-level governance. And the conveners, as you can see from your screen, are some of the conveners that you are privy to be sitting with in the room. So the Dula Omar Institute for Constitutional Law Governance and Human Rights, which is at the University of the Western Cape in South Africa. But we also had the East African Local Governments Association. There was the Institute for Local Government Studies in Ghana, as well as the Intergovernmental Relations Technical Committee, which is really spearheading the devolution process in Kenya. And we were able to hear from not only from all the different speakers that have either worked around the committee itself, but then dedicated time to also dive in for us to have a sense of what it actually means in terms of looking at the devolution on the ground. What was important about this? It was important because we were bringing experts from Africa to deliberate and to have a discussion on, what does it actually mean to heighten and to put this debate on decentralization and multi-level governance. But also it was bringing together national and local government officials. And through the two-day workshop, we were really able to dive into a wide range of issues. And we can take the next slide. And just, Amy, if you manage. So what were the workshop objectives? I mean, the idea was really, how do we look at some of the practical steps to advocate, but to also look a little bit more for inclusive and effective decentralization, with a focus on sub-Saharan Africa, and also looking at the localization agenda. And then also, we wanted to really take the opportunity to just pause and acknowledge that you had diverse knowledge on the continent, and also to provide an opportunity, obviously, for some networking, for some sharing, really with a focus on Anglophone and Francophone countries, and realizing that they bring different best practices, but there's also different values within the Anglophone space and within the Francophone space. We can go to the next slide. I mean, apart from, you can see, I was just thinking about it when I saw this slide, the colorful picture there just tells you that indeed we are not starting from zero. I know Yap was mentioning, years of experience of where we've come from. I think I stand on the shoulders of my elders who have worked around this space of decentralization much longer, but I think that a lot of us would resonate from the fact that the consensus on the debate is not starting from zero, which means that we've got a lot that we can leverage in terms of diverse knowledge in Africa. But also, as some of the LPSA structures have been outlined to you, how do we leverage on that? How do we leverage on structures that already exist as we try to build and advocate for Pan-African network on decentralization? And then also, how do we harness the interest that we have from a wide range of partners, bilateral partners within the EU, the UN system, outside of the UN system, but also in terms of local actors on the ground? How do we extend to the community level? And the premise was also very important in looking at the fact that we are starting from a space in which there's a lot of scholarly knowledge and capacity. And I'm glad that we're making this presentation at the African School of Decentralization, because this was one of the critical examples that came out. And actually, as a result of that, we continue. It's not the first time that you've got LPSA featuring in the program for the ASD. And so really glad that we're able to join once again. And so the second part of the premise was also, how do we contextualize? How do we move from learning from the past, not being stuck in the best practice mode? How do we really also remember that local authorities are critical, legislators are critical, and the community is critical? And all this really sits within the framework of this contextualization and understanding where we have come from. Next slide. The key takeaways were plenty. I'll try not to go through them in the interest of time, because these slides will be shared with you. One of the things, apart from the contextualization, was to talk about where is decentralization rooted in different countries. And in some, it seemed to be rooted in post-colonial nation building, resolving conflict. It talked about, preserving traditional and indigenous mechanisms, but also talked, for most, have even advanced and moved towards the service delivery, right? But the emphasis on decentralization in most African countries is now targeting the service delivery perspective with a focus on the community and the role of non-state actors as well in driving this forward. We spent a lot of time on that third point, on the African Charter of Values and Principles of Decentralization. I don't know how much time you've spent on talking about this, Yap, within the last couple of days. But instead of kind of just also honing in on the potential that it has, what potential would a platform that brings Pan-African actors on decentralization to inspire more continental action by localizing the development efforts that actually serve people, but also to what extent do we call this charter and our member states on the African continent accountable to what they signed off to in 2014, knowing that there's not a lot of signatures that have been attached to this, and not much implementation actually has kicked off the ground. And then apart from issues around community and inclusion, it was really, there's some really demonstrated experiences that also came out with some of the speakers that shared that we have a lot to learn in terms of have to make it much more effective, and so that we are not just ticking boxes and moving away from this mode of a collection of best practice to really implementing what we have heard, what really works, but also understanding that we may have limited opportunities and there's insufficient mechanisms for us to bring this knowledge together. But what do we have? And what can we do? And the LPSA structure was seen as an important outcome out of this. So going on to the next slide, because I think in relation to this particular point on data and analysis, it was important that we continue to be consistent. And then in terms of key outcomes, I think one of the things that came out more prominently is that we do need a Pan-African decentralization platform. And I won't spend time in going into this because I know that co-chair Judy will touch more on this. Why do we need it? It's a space for community of practice. We can really bring our knowledge together. We can work around a repository and understand how that would work. We talked about a transition plan, which was important, but we also talked about making sure that what do we focus on, and that's promoting decentralization through effective evidence and data governance for effective policymaking. I think that should be the last slide, if I'm not mistaken. We go next. Would that be it, Jamie? Thank you so much for listening, and you're welcome to share with us any questions that you may have about
Thank you so much, Patty, for sharing the richness of those 2 days of conversation on decentralization and localization so aptly. I think really gives us all a good sense of what LPSA is capable of. It's a thoughtful network, it's an evidence-based network, and I think it has the potential also with the emerging theme of Panda to fill a critical gap on the continent of bringing scholarship, activism, and governance together, I think, very effectively. So thank you so much for doing that. And let's turn our attention then to Judy, who's going to talk a little bit more about the emerging idea of this Pan-African network of decentralization advocates. And again, I'm also posing the question to us here as participants. Start thinking about what can you contribute, or what do you think of Panda? What would you like to do with it? This should be your network that you are part of, and that we all use to take the conversations in the ASE and the kind of conversations that Patty referred to forward into the future. So Judy Oduma is one of the 3 co-chairs of the Africa Working Group. And I'm going to hand over to her now to take us through the Panda ideas. Over to you, Judy.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Ka, for giving us a very good background. And thank you again, one of our co-chairs, for leading this work, preparing for the ASD, and making sure that this conversation actually happens today. Maybe just to start off, I must say I am very glad to see that we have a very critical mass within the room today that actually would help us in thinking about how do we deepen this work, how do we deepen the conversation, how do we spread out to ensure that we have this voice on decentralization and localization, actually take a deeper meaning, but also in-depth conversation across the continent. And I think with Jamie's discussion, clearly, with the 3 drivers here as the co-chairs, I hope you can see my screen. That's Yap, Ka, and myself. We couldn't agree more with the team that sat in May here in Nairobi, that it is time. It's really time to think about how do we deepen this conversation on decentralization and localization by establishing the Pan-African network on decentralization advocates. We could agree more that it's time to look at the practitioners, the communities, the academia, the researchers who have been in this area for a long time, but then strengthen the voice so that we can move together in Africa. And with that, mine will be very simple. Maybe it'll just take 2-3 minutes, because some of this I'm sure you're going to actually ask during the session, but also you might be able to give us some feedback now, or maybe even after the course, on just 2 or 3 questions. Do we see what I have on the screen?
Yes.
Yes, we can see.
Yes. So number 1, how do we see Panda develop? And I think Yap has already begun asking us this question. We were thinking about 3 key components. 1, these activities we propose to begin with as a Panda in order to actually advance the conversation. 1, around knowledge management, just to begin to undertake some surveys to generate knowledge on policy development, but also on influencing topics such as the state of local government institutions, localizing development, topics that would actually inform decentralization reforms in the region. Number 2, how do we advance the general state of knowledge and knowledge sharing? We have organized for the past 1 year different webinars and events, but we would like to look at conferences. One of the biggest platform that we think has worked and we think we could actually progress with is the Africa School on Decentralization. Hopefully, you can be able to support this also in future. If you look at 40 candidates and participants these 2 weeks, I think if we continuously have such, then definitely we're going to spread further. We'll continue with the webinars, of course, on topical issues. But what was also critical and also came up in the May workshop was organizing annually what we call the PANDA annual conference. We'll be able to reach out and speak to different members, and as you've been told, membership is free, to look at what are the emerging topics that you can always convene annually to discuss and then spread the word. Develop policy papers, white papers to inform and to influence policy across the continent, especially around decentralization. Then finally, just on outreach and field building, we intend to continue the advocacy work on decentralization in Africa. We are going to actually reach out to more members. I think Jap has spoken about that, Demi has spoken about that. Ka also spoke about that. It is free. We would like that you register, but also invite other friends, other practitioners in this field to also join us. But then what is also exciting, we hope that in the coming year, we can have regional conferences, regional summits. That's in the East, the West, of course, Ka is in the West, and then of course in the South, guided but by what is emerging around decentralization conversation and localization. So that's what we think we could do. But then the question is, what type of support is available? How can we all become a part of it? One, do we have seated here any topics that we think we can explore and work on building on the knowledge and community of practice? I think Jamie was very clear on how that goes. Do we have other activities we may be able to propose to deepen and to build PANDA in order to catalyze action? How do we move from here? What actions, what steps, what critical steps must we take from now on? And then, of course, on partnerships, how can we know you come from different institutions. I think I have my friends there from Senate, from IALGA, from different organizations in the academia, non-governmental organizations, and other non-state actors, ministries, and all that. How can we ride on what you already have? How can we partner so that we can begin elevating this conversation? And finally, what are the development institutions? Who are the other partners working in the same area or donors you think you can share and you can approach to begin building the network, to begin actually concretizing and making sure we achieve these goals? So that's it from me. I would like to open it up so that you can have suggestions, proposals, and Jap, my co-chair, will be able to help me with facilitating that session to see, do we come up with a few, proposals and suggestions. Even if you don't finish now, we know you have shared your emails, your contacts. You can always come up and make these suggestions. Thank you, and over to you, Jap.
Thank you so much, Judy, for giving that input and asking some of those critical questions. Judy also speaks from very deep experience, not only in devolution, but also in leading organizations. As the former CEO of Kenya County Assembly Forum, she has a wealth of experience that clearly, benefits LPSA tremendously. So thanks everyone for your inputs, Jamie, Carr, Judy, and Patty. And now it's our time to give our input. Those of us who have joined online, please share your observations by the chat box, and Jackie will pass them on to us. And what's critically for us here, you've now all spent just over half of the ASD talking about human rights and decentralization. We've spoken about inclusivity, responsiveness, the right to housing, the right to food, financing local governments for human rights. Before you know it, the ASD will be over. I hate to break the news to you. It's only a few more days, and then you're going to have to return to wherever we came from, whether it was our studies, it was our work in government, in civil society, in politics. And how are we going to stay connected, not just to each other as a group of colleagues, friends, but connected to the overall theme and activities of decentralization and localization. And how can we use the emerging Pan-African network of decentralization to do that? Because it fills the gap. I'm sure many of you will agree with me. There are not many organizations on the continent that powerfully bring together practitioners, scholars, around the theme of decentralization. We all know that there are a number of international organizations and networks, but none of them, I would argue, as thoughtful and as dedicated as LPSA around the issue of evidence-based engagement on decentralization. We don't see decentralization just as a political program, or as something to appease international development partners. No, it's a complex issue. It's a very complicated issue that has many dimensions to it. We try to unpack one theme at a time. What do you make of this potential? Because let me assure you again that what we have in LPSA and Panda is an opportunity for a real momentum to add it to the ASD. Do you have any suggestions, any potential answers to the questions that Julie is asking about what other topics can we explore and work on in building this community of practice? What other activities can we propose? We've heard about the activities that the working group has undertaken, and the main convening in Nairobi. And what other activities can be undertaken, and how can we use this network and the momentum that it generates to continue the work that we have been doing here in the ASD? Any idea, any observations on how we can make the best use of this network and contribute? Please. And project your voice, you're going to need your rally voice for this one.
From my side, not necessarily need to answer the question that you posted, but just to appreciate the platform that is put in front of us, because my director, when I gave my send of message was go and bring us network.
Bring us network.
Yeah. So we need network, we need to work together with those that have done better so that we can learn from each other and we can be able to also move our process accordingly. Because we have this problem and the best we can do is to learn from each other. So for me, it's a very useful platform that I will take it up and as a government and as a ministry, that we can form part of that group. And our partners and to be able to register our views and our shortfalls and see where we can get help and help where we can from Namibia.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. That's Ilya from Namibia. Any other observations, questions? Yes, please.
Yeah, from the I think it will be very important for us to stay in contact so that what we begin to do here continue. I want to suggest that from each country, maybe we have alumni groups. I'm the third person from the new participating in this program. I think we have from now to work together so that this meeting can be known in our government of the ministry. If in each country also we can have the community of people coming from this session of training. We can continue to have the data and to continue to discuss. And then from our discussion, we can let our government or ministry to know about what is going on here. Thank you.
Thank you. That was Pinanyo from Benin. And I just want to latch on to what he said, that one of the very strong points of LPSA for me personally has been bringing together West, Francophone, Anglophone Africa into one network. Because the reality is that when we talk about decentralization, devolution, the Kenyans and the South Africans, they like to huddle up in one corner, and the Ugandans and the Zimbabweans, we all talk the same language, more or less. And, you know, the West Africans, Francophone Africans, you know, they sometimes feel like, hey, our language is a bit different, our history is different, and we have different practices and different challenges. And it's really important to cross that divide. And I think LPSA has been, as far as my experience, the most successful network that I've come across in terms of doing that. And, so having participants from Benin speaking about the and it also brings to mind for me the importance of when we have now essentially 4 groups of alumni of ASD. Because this is the 4th edition. The first edition was online because of COVID. The second one was in Cape Town, the third one in others, and now the 4th one in Cape Town. We need to actually perhaps look through the people that have been part of the ASD and connect the participants from the same country with one another. I think that's a very good idea. So that's very practical observation that just came through. Thanks for that. Any other observations on how we can leverage LPSA, Panda, and our own momentum? Let's turn to Sandra from Kenya.
All right, thank you. First is to congratulate this forum on the training and the opportunity to be able to network. I want to express my gratitude really for the direction of your training, both on Africa and also beyond Africa. I've been keenly looking at the topics that we've been able to discuss and our aspiration to ensure that we have supported the decentralization, while effective decentralization units, and functional unity practice. One thing that I would suggest moving forward as well, and I may be biased in this, but I will declare that I've had the opportunity to work in the work units. I've had the opportunity to work also with the national government. But there is one aspect now where intergovernmental relations, intergovernmental coordination. As we discuss all these issues, what we need to do to ensure decentralization works. Again, there is that principle of interdependence between the national government and decentralized units. That is one way in that we must be able to delve into and look into that. And also, if we are able to strengthen that, then the relations between the national government and the county government or the decentralized units will be strengthened. Because one, when we are discussing the issue of finance, every decentralized unit depends also on the funding from the national government. So if we don't have good relations, then we'll go back to what we're discussing and saying, sometimes this is tied to the political temperature of the country. Maybe also the determination on the issue of the policies in the county, in the decentralized unity. We discussed, we gave us a good example where, for the issue of rights to environment, where national government policies which have been developed must be enforced by the decentralized unity. So if we don't have a good working relationship, we don't have a strong governance structure, then we will be strengthening one end, but the center will break and will not be able to get progress. I was very hopeful, and I'm glad that I've been able to interact with our colleagues from the various countries. And one of the things that I foresee in the is that I thought that the South African intergovernmental space is stronger than Kenya. I expected that other countries who have had decentralization beforehand were going to be able to dispose. But we have learned the same way we also have in Kenya, that some of these provisions in law exist, but the implementation of it is barren. Whether it is being implemented to the latter, or it has been, there's a deviation from the law, or there's creativity around the law. Also, I remember the prof from Ethiopia. When he said, we have two choices. Do you want to bury our head in the sun? Or do we comply? So the question for me would be, as we progressively develop to be able to influence the decentralized units, the strength of decentralized units for provision of both service and human rights. Also, remind ourselves that there is need to strengthen, because these decentralized units are not exclusively independent. Thank you.
Thank you, Samuel. Thank you, Casey.
Yes, thank you.
Commonly referred to you. Thank you so much. I mean, for answering one of these questions in terms of, what topics can we venture into, and your desire is immediately met, because we have a webinar coming up in December, on the 12th of December. I think speaking exactly to what was referred to, namely intergovernmental supervision and decentralization in Africa, assessing, monitoring, evaluation, support, and intervention practices, looking at a very critical part of intergovernmental relations. So we can all look forward to that, and hopefully as many of you as possible will join us. Again, it's also a topic where we need to cross the divide between Anglophone Africa and Francophone Africa, with very different traditions on intergovernmental relations and more topical decentralization, where the subnational government fits in. So very critical theme that we will be discussing there. Thanks for that. I saw another hand here, somewhere, please.
Participants. So actually, on the other side, I thought it will be interesting, first of all, to see if we can establish a formal structure. So take what we have already and almost get a little bit of political cloud. Let's say create, take what we have and then not push ourselves, but then let's say go to the African Union and form a working group there, so that all our work can be channeled to the African Union and therefore disseminated as well from the power that we on our respective countries, especially disseminating the knowledge we have created, the government information, but finding like almost like a recognized channel again to basically to channel all of our work to the African Union, to the working group again. And that's one aspect. And the second aspect is that, for example, through the chair of the European and then through the DOI, we can actually pool our resources to put funding to actually, let's say, grants and scholarship money to actually encourage. Some of you, I imagine, you have research that you want to be part of, but also want to put out there, so that we can basically fund a lot of those research, right? That way all of us can be part of, based on our knowledge, that shared experience. But then having that pool of funding to basically allocate grants to the research, to maximize the research as much as possible. And then producing, not only research, but also policy brief for our decision makers. And of course, in doing that, also encouraging young people to be part of the process. And again, once we have like a knowledge hub, then we can actually have enough information to actually do proper advocacy and raising awareness among our decision makers again, to show the importance of really taking these decisions. So that just like some of the talk I had.
No, thank you very much for welcome. And yeah, you're so right. None of these things are possible if we don't fight. We could never pull this thing off without the support of other institutions and vice versa. So we really need to think about how we can pull resources yeah, we can enhance the momentum around the world. And your point about the African Union, well, thank you. Last year, ASE was centered around the theme, the African Child. And, we realized how beneficial but also complicated it is to reach out to the African Union and get their attention and work with them. At the same time, that's where we need to focus on us. And one of the ideas has also been for Canada to develop maybe a part of a strategy or a sub-strategy on how can we promote this African Charter on the values and principles of decentralization, which is there, sits with the African Union, but is not really having the kind of momentum that we wanted. We currently have ratified it. It's going very, very slow. That could be a rallying point for us as continent-wide practitioners and advocates for decentralization, that we want to take that up and start promoting the African Charter. Knowing full well that the Charter in and of itself is not going to make a difference. In the end, it's just a document, it's a treaty, it's a commitment. Yet we see that in other continents, particularly in the European continent, the African Charter on local self-government has really made a tremendous impact on decentralization and localization. Thanks, Robert, for that. Looking around, whether there's any further points, Jackie?
Yes, I just want to build on something that she said about developing research and policy briefs that inform decentralization reforms and decision-making processes in our countries. Already, part of what LPSA does is if you have published research, if you have something interesting, if there are updates or developments in your part of the continent, you can just get in touch with us and we will help you in disseminating. Our platform has a lot of information, has a lot of paper, a lot of research. And if you can contribute to that research, and we will post your work and of course give credit and even links to where people can find that information. And you can also contribute as speakers. There's a lot of experience in the room. In all our webinars, in all our events, please feel free to get in touch with us. Tell us, we are doing this, we've learned this. These are especially focused on solutions and experiences, really not just research, but really how can we improve and enhance inclusive and efficient decentralization. So please feel free to get in touch. We are single and searching.
Thank you so much, Jackie. We're running a bit over time, so we'll start wrapping up. But please, if there's any further comments, I'm sure we can keep it into good. Yes, please.
Thank you. I think this is a wonderful report that will benefit a lot from the community right now. So I noticed that you are in partnership with UCLG. So how is the community like?
Maybe I can direct that one to Jamie. Jamie, if you're still with us, basically, Gertrude from Malawi is asking more about the relationship with UCLG. That's something you could speak to.
No, thanks so much. Excellent question. There is a little bit of a difference between LPSA and UCLG, although we work closely together at all levels, global level, as well as at the regional level. In fact, below UCLG Africa, there are supposed to be sub-regional local government associations. For instance, as was mentioned, the East Africa County and Local Government Association is very much part of our network, as are individual local government organizations. We have a slight difference between the way UCLG sees the world and LPSA sees the world, in that UCLG is mostly confined to local government members only, right? It's a member organization advocating very specifically for a specific view of the world. Whereas our job is to bring together all different views. And most of the time, local governments are going to play a very specific role, but it's probably not always the same role that UCLG wants. I'd say maybe 80% of the time, we see the world the same, but because we are a global network of professionals, we can speak a little bit more freely and sometimes think outside of the box. But we work very closely together with UCLG. There are some problems with UCLG Africa right now. but internal to the organization. But effectively, we want to partner at the global level, the regional level, and the country level with local government associations and UCLG to support each other. I'm thinking of let's say the local government association in Tanzania might want to have research done that it can't do in-house. So what can a network like LPSA or Panda do to bring researchers and local government officials together? So I see a lot of cross-fertilization in views. Also, UCLG is not an evidence organization, right? It doesn't have strong researchers. It prepares research products, but largely by getting consultants to write reports for them, whereas we're a global network. So we're slightly different animals, but I think we have an incredible overlap in what we do. I think it would also be wise for us to work at a sub-regional level. As Jaap mentioned, Africa is an incredibly diverse place, both in terms of local governance experience as well as linguistically and otherwise. So I can see a merit in working at the sub-regional level. We don't have to get together with 55 countries to learn from each other. We might be able to get together in East Africa with 8 or 10 countries, in Central Africa, in West Africa. So I see a lot of opportunity there for cross-learning and for collaboration and partnership. Back to the room.
Thank you so much, Jamie. Let's go straight over to Tinash, Dr. Chikwata. Would you make an input over to you?
Yes, so thank you very much to the presenters. I mean, we start part, but just to refer to the idea of evidence-based policy making and lawmaking. I think this is one of the critical elements of this association that you don't find with others. But one point that I wanted to just check is whether the logical framework that the alliance has developed over the years, which I was also involved in developing the profile for South Africa. Because in this room, I also see capable people that can develop logical frameworks for their respective countries. And the AST, I think, is just the right platform to be able to set the foundation for that. So maybe if any Jamie could also speak to that, it would be helpful for the participants in this room. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Tinash. So for the benefit of everyone, the logical framework is essentially an assessment of the state of decentralization, localization in a given country, according to a set of indicators and questions, broadly assessing what's the real situation on the ground, not just in law, but also practice of decentralization. And that's been a very successful element of LPSA's strategy and activities on the continent and elsewhere. So I'm going to ask Jenny to respond briefly to that, but before that, I'm just looking around to see if there's any other questions or observations. We do need to start bringing it to a close. And I'm going to ask our other panelists, Kar and Julie and Patty, if they have any final concluding observations they want to make, perhaps after Jamie's response. Jamie, over to you.
It was a little bit to hear. I heard Tinash, most of Tinash's comments, but not the specific question about the logical framework. Could you repeat it briefly, Jaap? I'll be very brief in response though.
Sure. Essentially, as I understood it, the question whether the future of the logical framework and implementation, and whether we have here a group of experts here, whether they could be drawing on the participants in the ASD to take the logical framework further and perhaps add further countries to that project. Am I right?
Yes.
Yeah, I got it correctly. So that was probably.
No, I think that's a fantastic question, and to keep it very brief, the answer is absolutely yes. I think there are a number of areas where knowledge, if it is not already available, should be generated. It should be generated by the experts. And when I say experts, I'm looking at the room right now as the experts on decentralization and localization in Africa. I am not looking at people sitting in Washington, in London, in Paris, or wherever as the experts. So I think having Panda be a place where colleagues like yourselves come together, where Panda could facilitate basic analysis of local governance institutions, for instance, using the Logica framework, so that you're able at the country level and across countries to use a common language in what is the nature of our local governance institutions would be fantastic. Likewise, I think it would be fantastic to have that conversation on local government finance. It is not the focus of this year's program at ASD, but I think it's critical for each country to be able to analyze its multi-level governance finances in a comparative way and to compare yourself to your colleagues and neighbors. Is Zambia spending enough money at the local level? Well, compared to who? Maybe compared to Malawi, compared to South Africa, compared to Zimbabwe, right? Compared to Kenya, compared to Nigeria. That data right now is only really partially available. So I am looking towards you as the kind of the foundation of a Pan-African network to bring that knowledge together. We can, of course, work together on the methodology, but really I see, as decentralization implies, things should be done at the lowest level that can perform that task efficiently. And I see that being in your room right now and not in my room. So our job as the LPSA Secretariat is to support that process. Back to the room. Thank you. And thanks, Dinesh, for your question.
Thank you, Jamie. Thanks so much for that answer. So after the break, we're going to play 30 seconds, which is a game on decentralization and human rights. And I'm going to close this session with a bit of 30 seconds as well and ask Patty, Judy, and Carl to give us their closing observation or just a greeting in 30 seconds. So you've got 30 seconds each to just give us your final observation. So let's start with, let's just go back to the order that we used, which is to start with Carl and then Patty and then Judy, like did it. Yes. Carl, over to you.
Is she here? She dropped off.
Has she dropped off?
Yeah.
Okay. So
Paddy is ready.
Patty, then we go to you. Patty, over to you.
Unmute yourself.
We can't hear you yet.
To say, I think once again that is this better? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I was just going to say that when Panda is in action, you need to be a part of it. And without partners on the ground and colleagues and individuals who are working around local public sector, it will be not possible for us to drive through and elevate the discussions that we continue to have around what decentralization can really mean for others. So I'm hoping you more sunshine than my forehead is showing. I really have to go to a window to find sunshine. So greetings from Germany and enjoy the sun and the rest of the session in Cape Town.
Thank you so much, Patty. Judy, over to you.
Thank you very much. I think Paddy has said it all. Make sure you're a part of the movement and the train when we begin. I had a question or rather a concern on intergovernmental fiscal transfers and intergovernmental relations. I think try to join the meeting on the 12th. We'll be having that in-depth discussion on the same. We'll also share, once we have the scheduling done, we'll share with you in your emails what the plans are. But just be open and tell us, are there any other ventures? Are there any other lines? Are there any other programs we can jump on and begin this a very critical partnership? Thank you and all the best for the rest of the week.
Thank you, Judy. I'm looking at my boss, Jackie. Are we good?
We're good.
From your side?
Please register. Yes.
Sorry.
I have sent the link on the chat, on the Zoom chat, but also in the WhatsApp group. Please, it takes you 30 seconds to register, and then it's out of the way. You have access to information, you have access to newsletters, updates, You can contact us at any time during working hours, but there's always somebody working. Jamie is in the US, and yeah. So please register. It's going to be an exciting year ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. I knew there was something up. So this has been great, but nerve-wracking at the same time, because here we are in the mountains of Stellenbosch, and we were having a conversation with someone in Germany, someone in Cameroon, and someone in Nairobi, and it all worked out. So amazing. Thanks very much for your participation, and thanks to everyone who joined online and for the time, patience, and engagement. Sorry, it went a bit over time, but it's all in the game. Thank you, everyone, and see you after the break in about